A shot rang out in the crisp Montana air, stopping Winifred Thompson's wedding before she could say, "I do." The bride, resplendent in white lace, never expected her special day to end with her being bound and tossed from the back of a wagon into the raging waters of Redemption Creek, or that the man who would save her would change her life forever. Winifred gasped as the frigid water enveloped her, the heavy fabric of her wedding dress pulling her beneath the surface. The spring floods had turned the normally placid creek into a roaring torrent, and with her hands tied behind her back, she had little hope of surviving. The faces of her captors, her would-be husband's business rivals, disappeared from view as the current dragged her downstream. Not far away, Warren Whitaker halted his horse at the sound of commotion. The 30-year-old rancher had been checking fence lines when he heard shouting and what sounded like a woman's scream. Following the noise, he arrived at the creek's edge just in time to see white fabric bobbing in the churning water. Without hesitation, Warren dove from his horse into the flooded creek. The cold hit him like a punch to the gut, but he forced his strong arms to cut through the water toward the struggling figure. Years of breaking horses and mending fences had made him powerful, but the current fought him every inch of the way. "Hold on," he shouted, though he doubted she could hear him over the roar of the water. Winifred was barely conscious when strong hands gripped her shoulders. Her lungs burned for air, and the world had gone dark at the edges. She felt herself being pulled, the current still trying to claim her as she and her rescuer were swept downstream. Warren managed to grab a low-hanging branch, his muscles straining as he held both himself and the woman against the force of the water. With a tremendous effort, he dragged them toward the shore, collapsing on the muddy bank with the bride still clutched in his arms. "Miss, can you hear me?" Warren quickly untied her hands, turned her onto her side, and patted her back firmly. Winifred coughed violently, water spilling from her mouth as air finally reached her desperate lungs. Her vision cleared slowly, revealing the face of a man with concerned blue eyes and soaking wet dark hair plastered to his forehead. "Thank you," she managed to whisper before another fit of coughing overtook her. "Don't try to talk yet," Warren said, his voice gentle as he removed his sodden coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. "What in tarnation happened? Who would throw a bride into Redemption Creek?" Winifred shivered, both from cold and from the memory of what had transpired. "My wedding. Men came, shots fired, they took me." Her teeth chattered as she spoke, making it difficult to form the words. "All right, questions can wait," Warren decided, looking at her pale face with concern. "We need to get you warm and dry. My cabin's not far from here." He whistled sharply, and moments later, his faithful horse Thunderbolt appeared through the trees. Warren helped Winifred to her feet, but her water-logged dress weighed her down and her legs wobbled like a newborn colt's. "I don't think I can walk," she admitted, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "No need to try," Warren replied, lifting her into his arms with surprising ease. He settled her on Thunderbolt's back before mounting behind her, one arm securely around her waist as he guided the horse toward his homestead. The year was 1878, and this part of Montana territory was still wild and largely untamed. Warren had staked his claim 5 years earlier after serving as a cavalry scout during the conflicts with native tribes. He'd built himself a modest but sturdy cabin and slowly expanded his ranch, the Double W, into a respectable operation with a small herd of cattle and several fine horses. As they approached his cabin, Winifred took in the neat homestead with appreciation. A corral stood to one side with 3 horses watching their approach curiously. The cabin itself was larger than most, with a covered porch and glass window signs that its owner was doing well for himself. "This is your home?" she asked, her voice still rough from the creek water. Warren nodded. "It's not much compared to what you're probably used to, but it's mine." He helped her down from Thunderbolt and guided her into the cabin. The interior was surprisingly tidy for a bachelor's quarters, with a stone fireplace, a wooden table with 4 chairs, and a bed in the corner separated from the main room by a patterned curtain. "Let me get a fire going," Warren said, gently setting her in a chair near the fireplace. "There's a trunk with some clothes that might fit you behind that curtain. They belonged to my sister before she moved east with her husband." Winifred nodded gratefully, still too shocked and exhausted to question why she was putting her life in the hands of a stranger. Once Warren had the fire crackling, he discreetly stepped outside to tend to his horse. Giving her privacy to change, with numb fingers, Winifred struggled out of her ruined wedding dress. The beautiful gown that had cost her father a small fortune now lay in a sodden heap on the floor. She found a simple calico dress in the trunk that was only slightly too large and gratefully changed into it, along with dry undergarments. When Warren returned, he carried a pot of water for tea and some dried meat and biscuits. "It's not much of a meal for a bride," he said with an apologetic smile, "but it's warm and filling." Winifred's eyes filled with unexpected tears. "I'm not a bride," she whispered. "I never said I do." Warren set the food on the table and pulled up a chair across from her. "Perhaps you'd better tell me what happened, Miss Thompson, Winifred Thompson, though most call me Winnie." She accepted the cup of tea he offered, wrapping her fingers around its warmth. "I was to marry Edwin Porter today. He owns the largest mercantile in Helena, Porter." Warren's brow furrowed. "I know of him. Doesn't strike me as the type to have enemies who'd harm his bride." Winnie laughed bitterly. "You don't know him well, then. Edwin has made many enemies in his business dealings, men who believe he cheated them." She took a sip of tea before continuing. "During the ceremony, 3 men burst in with guns. There was shouting about a debt and revenge. Edwin ran, leaving me behind." Her voice hardened. "They said taking me would hurt him more than taking his money." Warren's jaw tightened. "No man worthy of the name abandons his bride to danger." "I'm beginning to see that now," Winnie admitted. "The marriage was more my father's arrangement than my desire. Edwin is 20 years my senior, but he's wealthy, and my father's ranch has been struggling." "How old are you, Miss Thompson?" Warren asked, suddenly concerned he'd rescued a child. 22, she replied. "Old enough to know better than to agree to marry a man I didn't love, but young enough to still obey my father." Relief washed over Warren's face. "We should send word to your family. They must be frantic with worry." Winnie nodded slowly. "Yes, but not tonight. I don't think I can face anyone just yet." She looked up at him with eyes that held both gratitude and uncertainty. "I don't even know your name, sir, though I owe you my life." "Warren Whitaker," he replied with a slight bow of his head, "owner of the Double W Ranch and your humble servant." For the first time since her ordeal began, Winnie smiled genuinely. "Well, Mr. Whitaker, it seems fate had other plans for me today." "Fate or providence," Warren agreed. "Either way, I'm glad I was nearby." As night fell, Warren insisted Winnie take his bed while he slept on a bedroll near the fire. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her as she replayed the day's events in her mind. The wedding that wasn't, the terrifying moments in the creek, and the strong arms that had pulled her from death's grip. Warren Whitaker was nothing like the men she knew in Helena society. He was straightforward, capable, and had risked his life for a stranger without hesitation. Morning came with golden light streaming through the cabin windows. Winnie woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Warren was already up, cooking breakfast and moving quietly so as not to disturb her. "Good morning," she said, pushing aside the curtain. "I hope you don't mind that I slept late." Warren turned, a smile warming his weathered face. "Not at all. After what you've been through, you could sleep for a week and I wouldn't blame you." Winnie moved to the table, noticing how different she felt from yesterday. Her near drowning had washed away more than just her wedding plans. It had cleared her mind of the fog she'd been living in. "I need to let my family know I'm safe," she said after they'd eaten. "And I suppose I should speak with the sheriff about what happened." Warren nodded. "We can ride into town after breakfast. Helena's a half-day's journey from here." "You'd take me all that way?" Winnie asked, surprised by his continued kindness. "Of course," he replied as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I wouldn't send you off alone after what happened." They set out mid-morning, Winnie riding a gentle mare from Warren's small herd. She wore the borrowed calico dress and a wide-brimmed hat he'd given her to protect her fair skin from the sun. As they rode, Warren pointed out landmarks and told stories of his time in the territory. "How did you come to Montana?" Winnie asked as they crossed a high meadow dotted with wildflowers. "I was a cavalry scout during the conflicts," Warren explained. "Saw enough of this land to know I wanted to put down roots here once my service ended. Used my army pay to buy the initial parcel for the W. And no Mrs. Whitaker?" Winnie asked before she could stop herself, then blushed at her forwardness. Warren chuckled. "No, madam, never found the right woman willing to take on a stubborn cowboy and his dreams of a cattle empire." "It's a beautiful dream," Winnie said softly, looking out over the rolling landscape. "My father had similar aspirations, but droughts and hard winters have taken their toll. That's why he was so eager for me to marry Edwin." "A father wanting security for his daughter is understandable," Warren said, "but selling her to the highest bidder isn't the way." Winnie glanced at him sharply. "That's precisely what it felt like, though I never dared say it aloud." They rode in companionable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. As they approached Helena, the traffic on the road increased, wagons loaded with supplies, riders on various errands, and even a stagecoach rumbling past in a cloud of dust. Helena had grown from a mining camp to a proper city in recent years, with brick buildings replacing many of the original wooden structures. The streets were busy with commerce, and the sidewalks filled with people going about their business. Winnie felt suddenly anxious as they rode down Main Street. "Everyone will be talking about what happened, the scandal of it all." Warren guided his horse closer to hers. "Hold your head high. You did nothing wrong and you survived what would have killed many." His words gave her courage, and she straightened her spine as they continued toward the sheriff's office. They had just dismounted when a cry rang out from across the street. "Winifred! Oh my God, Winifred!" A woman in her 40s came running toward them, her face a mixture of disbelief and joy. Behind her followed a tall man with graying hair and a stern expression. "Mother, father," Winnie called, moving to meet them. Her mother engulfed her in an embrace, tears streaming down her face. "We thought you were dead when those men took you and Edwin said you'd been thrown in the creek." "Edwin said what?" Winnie pulled back, looking at her mother in shock. Her father, Thomas Thompson, stepped forward. "He came to us yesterday, half crazed, saying bandits had attacked the church and tossed you into Redemption Creek during the getaway. We've had search parties out since then." His eyes moved to Warren, standing respectfully a few paces away. "Who is this man?" "This is Warren Whitaker," Winnie said, gesturing for him to join them. "He saved my life. He saw me in the creek and dove in after me." Mrs. Thompson immediately grabbed Warren's hand. "Sir, we owe you a debt we can never repay." Warren shook his head. "No debt necessary, madam. Anyone would have done the same." "Not anyone," Mr. Thompson said, studying Warren with newfound respect. "Most men would have thought twice before jumping into Redemption Creek during the spring floods." He extended his hand. "Thomas Thompson, I'm in your debt, Mr. Whitaker." As they shook hands, Winnie noticed a familiar figure hurrying down the street toward them. Edwin Porter, her almost husband, looked disheveled and frantic. When he spotted her, his face transformed with relief. "Winifred, thank the heavens." He reached for her, but she stepped back, moving closer to Warren. Edwin's eyes narrowed slightly as he took in her protective stance and the unfamiliar man at her side. "Who is this?" "Warren Whitaker," she replied coolly. "The man who saved me from drowning after your business rivals threw me into the creek." Edwin paled. "My dear, I tried to stop them, but they were armed." "Enough," Winnie interrupted, surprising herself with her firmness. "You ran, Edwin. You left me to die." A small crowd had begun to gather, drawn by the drama unfolding on the street. Edwin's eyes darted around nervously, aware of the damage this could do to his reputation. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private," he suggested. "I think the sheriff's office would be appropriate," Warren spoke up. Miss Thompson was the victim of a serious crime, and those responsible should be brought to justice. Edwin's face hardened. "And what business is it of yours, Cowboy?" Before Warren could respond, Thomas Thompson stepped between them. "Mr. Whitaker saved my daughter's life when you abandoned her, Porter. I'd watch your tone." The sheriff, alerted by the commotion, emerged from his office. Sheriff James Callahan was a no-nonsense lawman who had kept order in Helena for nearly a decade. "What's all this about?" he demanded, his hand resting casually near his holster. Winnie stepped forward. "I was kidnapped from my wedding yesterday, Sheriff. The men who took me tied my hands and threw me into Redemption Creek to drown." The sheriff's eyebrows shot up. "That's a serious accusation, Miss Thompson. Come inside, all of you, and let's sort this out." For the next hour, Winnie recounted her ordeal to the sheriff while her parents, Warren, and a subdued Edwin listened. She described the men who had interrupted the ceremony as well as she could, though everything had happened so quickly. "They mentioned something called the Fairview deal," she recalled. "They said you'd understand what that meant, Edwin." All eyes turned to Porter, who had grown increasingly uncomfortable during Winnie's testimony. "A misunderstanding," he muttered. "A business arrangement that went sour." Sheriff Callahan leaned forward. "A misunderstanding that nearly cost this young woman her life, Porter. I'll need more details than that." By the time they left the sheriff's office, Edwin Porter had reluctantly provided names of the men likely responsible, and Sheriff Callahan had dispatched deputies to locate them. Edwin had also revealed that he had indeed fled the church when the men arrived, a confession that earned him contemptuous looks from everyone present, including his almost father-in-law. "The wedding is off," Thomas Thompson announced firmly as they stood outside on the boardwalk. "No daughter of mine will marry a coward." Edwin sputtered indignantly, but one look at Winnie's resolute face told him arguing would be futile. With as much dignity as he could muster, he departed, promising to return Winnie's dowry in full. "That's the first sensible thing he said today," Mrs. Thompson remarked, watching him go. Winnie turned to Warren, who had remained a steadfast presence throughout the ordeal. "I don't know how to thank you properly, Mr. Whitaker." "No thanks needed," he assured her. "Though I'd be honored if you and your family would join me for dinner at the hotel before I head back to my ranch." Thomas Thompson clapped a hand on Warren's shoulder. "We'd be delighted, and I insist you stay at our home tonight. It's too late to start back to your ranch, and I'd like to hear more about your operation." That evening, over a hearty meal at Helena's finest hotel, Warren shared stories of his ranching successes and challenges. Thomas Thompson, it turned out, had land adjoining Warren's property, though they'd never formally met. "Your methods sound more efficient than what we've been doing," Thomas admitted. "Perhaps that's why you're thriving while we've been struggling." "It's not just methods," Warren said. "I've been fortunate with weather and cattle prices, but I'd be happy to show you what's worked for me." As the conversation continued, Winnie found herself watching Warren, noticing details she'd missed in the chaos of the previous day, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the respectful attention he gave to everyone who spoke, the quiet confidence in his bearing. When he caught her watching him, he gave her a small, private smile that sent warmth spreading through her chest. There was something about Warren Whitaker that made her feel both safe and exhilarated at the same time. The Thompsons' home was a spacious two-story house on the outskirts of Helena, reflecting their former prosperity. Warren was given a comfortable guest room, and Winnie retired to her childhood bedroom, her mind whirling with the events of the past 2 days. Sleep came easier than she expected, but her dreams were filled with rushing water and strong arms pulling her to safety. The next morning, Warren joined the family for breakfast, dressed in clean clothes Thomas had lent him. He announced his intention to return to his ranch, and Winnie felt an unexpected pang at the thought of him leaving. I've invited Mr. Whitaker to come back in a few days to advise me on some ranching matters, her father said, noting her downcast expression. He's agreed to share some of his breeding and grazing techniques. Winnie brightened. That's wonderful. Perhaps I could show you around our property when you return, Mr. Whitaker. I know every inch of it from my rides. I'd like that very much, Miss Thompson, Warren replied, his blue eyes warm. The next few weeks brought significant changes to Winnie's life. The men who had kidnapped her were captured trying to flee the territory and were now awaiting trial. Edwin Porter, disgraced by his cowardice, had sold his mercantile and moved to San Francisco, reportedly to start fresh where his reputation hadn't preceded him. More pleasantly, Warren Whitaker had become a regular visitor to the Thompson ranch. His suggestions had already begun to improve their cattle operation, and Thomas Thompson spoke of him with growing respect. For Winnie, each visit brought a deepening awareness of her feelings for Warren. He was unlike any man she'd known, genuine, hardworking, and unfailingly kind. When they rode together across the Thompson land, she found herself sharing thoughts and dreams she'd never voiced to anyone else. "I've always loved this land," she told him one afternoon as they sat beneath a cottonwood tree after a long ride. "Even when Father was pushing me to marry Edwin and move to town, I couldn't imagine being happy away from open skies and rolling hills." Warren nodded in understanding. "Some people are meant for town life and some need the freedom of the range. Sounds like you're the latter, like me." "Yes, exactly," Winnie said, pleased that he understood. "Edwin never comprehended that. He thought I'd be content with fine dresses and social calls once we were married." "And what would make you content, Winnie?" Warren asked softly, using her nickname for the first time. She looked at him, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting. "This," she said simply. "Land, horses, honest work, and—" She hesitated, then gathered her courage. "Someone who understands that those things matter to me." Warren's gaze held her steadily. "Someone like me." "Yes," she whispered. "Someone exactly like you." The kiss that followed was gentle and brief, but it sealed something between them, a promise, a possibility, a future neither had anticipated when fate brought them together at Redemption Creek. Summer passed in a golden haze of long rides, shared work, and growing affection. Warren became a fixture at the Thompson dinner table, and Winnie became a regular visitor to the Double W Ranch. Under their combined efforts, both ranches began to prosper again. By September, when the aspens began to turn gold against the mountainsides, Warren asked Thomas Thompson for permission to court his daughter officially. "You've had my blessing since the day you pulled her from that creek," Thomas replied, shaking Warren's hand firmly. "But I appreciate you asking all the same." That evening, Warren took Winnie for a sunset ride to a promontory overlooking both their properties. As the sky blazed with color, he turned to her with uncharacteristic nervousness. "Winnie, I've been thinking about the future, both of our futures." She smiled, her heart quickening. "Have you now? The Double W is doing well, and your father's ranch is recovering, but I've been wondering if perhaps the two properties might do even better as one." Winnie raised an eyebrow. "Are you proposing a business merger, Mr. Whitaker?" Warren laughed, taking her hands in his. "In a manner of speaking, but more importantly, I'm proposing a life together. I love you, Winifred Thompson. I think I have since I pulled you from that creek and saw you fighting to live despite everything. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears of joy sprang to Winnie's eyes. "Yes," she said without hesitation. 1,000 times yes." Their wedding took place on a crisp October day, with the mountains wearing their autumn colors like a celebration banner. Unlike Winnie's previous almost wedding, this one was a simple affair held outdoors at the boundary line between the two ranches, symbolizing the union of both the land and the people who loved it. Winnie wore a dress of ivory silk, far less elaborate than her first wedding gown but infinitely more meaningful. As she walked toward Warren, who waited beneath an arch of twisted willow branches, she felt none of the doubt or resignation that had accompanied her walk down the church aisle months before. This time, when the minister asked if she would take this man as her husband, her "I do" rang out clear and certain. Warren's answering vow was equally firm, his eyes never leaving hers as he promised to cherish and protect her all the days of his life. The celebration afterward brought together neighbors from miles around, with tables groaning under the weight of food and a fiddler providing music for dancing well into the night. Winnie and Warren moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and good wishes from the community that would support their union in the years to come. As the evening wound down, Warren led his bride to their horses for the ride to the W, which would now be their shared home. Before helping her mount, he pulled her into his arms for a lingering kiss. "No creek will ever part us," he whispered against her lips, referencing the unlikely beginning of their love story. Winnie smiled up at him, her heart full. "I think Redemption Creek brought us together rather than tore us apart. It lived up to its name." Their first months of marriage passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Winter came early that year, with heavy snows blanketing the joined ranches by late November. The newlyweds spent the cold evenings planning improvements for the spring and expanding the cabin into a proper home that would serve them for years to come. Warren proved to be as thoughtful a husband as he had been a suitor, always considering Winnie's opinions and including her in decisions about the ranch. For her part, Winnie thrived in her role as ranch mistress, applying the knowledge she'd gained growing up on her father's land while learning new skills from her husband. By spring thaw, they had expanded the cabin with 2 new rooms and a larger kitchen. They'd also decided to rebrand their combined herds under a new mark, the Redemption Ranch. "It seems fitting," Warren explained to Thomas Thompson, who had come to help with the spring branding. "That creek changed all our lives for the better." Thomas nodded in agreement. "Nearly lost my daughter to it, but in the end, it gave her the happiness I always wanted for her." He looked across the corral where Winnie was expertly cutting calves from the herd for branding. She was never meant for town life with a man like Porter. She belongs here with the land and with a man who appreciates her strength. Warren followed his gaze, pride evident in his expression. "She's the best partner a man could ask for. I thank God every day that I was riding fence lines near that creek when I was." As if sensing their attention, Winnie looked up and waved before returning to her task. The sun caught her hair, turning it to gold beneath her wide-brimmed hat. The prosperity of Redemption Ranch continued to grow over the following year. Warren's breeding programs improved their cattle stock, while Winnie's careful management of their finances allowed them to purchase additional grazing land. They began to develop a reputation for quality beef that commanded premium prices from buyers. In the spring of 1880, as the second anniversary of her rescue from the creek approached, Winnie shared news that brought Warren even greater joy than their business success. "We'll need to add another room to the house by winter," she told him one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. "For the nursery." Warren stared at her for a moment before understanding dawned. "Winnie, are you saying?" She nodded, her smile radiant. "Yes, Warren. We're going to have a baby." He whooped with joy, lifting her from her chair and spinning her around before setting her down with sudden concern. "Should I be doing that in your condition?" Winnie laughed. "I'm having a baby, not turning into porcelain, doctor. Miller says I'm healthy as a horse and should continue my normal activities for now." The news spread quickly through the surrounding ranches and into Helena. Thomas and Margaret Thompson were ecstatic at the prospect of becoming grandparents, and Margaret immediately began knitting baby clothes. As Winnie's pregnancy progressed, Warren became increasingly protective, often insisting on taking over her more strenuous tasks despite her protests that she remained perfectly capable. "I know you're capable," he told her one afternoon after refusing to let her help mend a broken corral fence. "But that doesn't mean you have to do everything. Let me take care of you the way you take care of me." Put that way, Winnie relented, understanding that his protectiveness came from love rather than doubt in her abilities. The baby arrived in early December, a healthy boy they named Thomas Warren Whitaker in honor of both their fathers. Warren paced anxiously outside their bedroom during the birth, but when the midwife finally allowed him inside, the sight of Winnie holding their son erased all his fears. "He's perfect," Warren whispered, gently touching the infant's tiny hand. "And you're amazing." Winnie smiled tiredly up at him. "We did this together just like everything else." Little Thomas thrived under his parents' loving care, growing into a sturdy toddler with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. By the time he was 2, he was already trying to follow Warren everywhere, dressed in miniature cowboy boots his grandfather had given him. The spring of 1883 brought another blessing to the Whitaker family with the birth of their daughter, Catherine Margaret. Warren doted on his little Katie, as she was quickly nicknamed, while remaining devoted to his son and wife. The family's happiness was marred only briefly that summer when news reached them that Edwin Porter had died in San Francisco during a cholera outbreak. Despite her history with the man, Winnie said a prayer for his soul and reflected on how differently her life might have turned out had he shown more courage on their wedding day. "I might never have known what real love feels like," she told Warren that night as they sat on their expanded porch, watching their children play in the yard. "I might have lived my whole life without knowing what it means to be truly cherished." Warren put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "And I might have lived my whole life alone, never knowing what it means to share everything: work, dreams, children with someone who completes me." 5 years after Warren had pulled Winnie from Redemption Creek, the ranch that bore its name had become one of the most successful operations in the territory. The Whitakers' breeding stock was sought after by ranchers throughout the West, and their management techniques were often cited as examples of modern ranching at its best. Their home had expanded along with their success, growing from Warren's bachelor cabin into a comfortable 2-story house with a wraparound porch. Yet despite their prosperity, they maintained the same work ethic and straightforward values that had defined them from the beginning. On the 5th anniversary of Winnie's rescue, Warren surprised her with a special outing. After leaving the children with their grandparents for the day, he took her riding to a spot they rarely visited, the bend in Redemption Creek where he had pulled her to safety. The creek was calm now, running clear and peaceful in its banks, nothing like the raging torrent it had been that fateful day. Warren spread a blanket on the grassy bank and unpacked a picnic lunch while Winnie watched the water flow. "It's strange to think that something so peaceful nearly took my life," she said. Accepting the glass of cider he offered her, Warren followed her gaze to the water. "Nature can be like that, beautiful and dangerous all at once. Like life itself, I suppose." "Like love, too," Winnie added with a smile. "Beautiful and a bit dangerous. Jumping into it requires courage." "Speaking of jumping in," Warren said, reaching into his pocket, "I have something for you." He handed her a small velvet box, a reminder of that day and everything that's come after. Winnie opened the box to find a delicate gold pendant in the shape of a river bend, with a tiny diamond marking the spot where he had saved her. Tears filled her eyes as he fastened it around her neck. "It's perfect," she whispered, touching the pendant. "Our beginning." "And our continuing story," Warren added, drawing her into his arms. "Every day with you has been a blessing I never expected to find when I dove into that creek." As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the water, they gathered their picnic and mounted their horses for the ride home. Their children would be waiting, along with the evening chores and all the responsibilities of the life they'd built together. But as they rode side by side, their shadows stretching long across the Montana grassland, both knew that the greatest adventure had begun in that creek, the adventure of building a life together that was richer and more fulfilling than either could have imagined alone. Redemption Ranch continued to prosper as the years passed. By the turn of the century, it had grown into one of the largest cattle operations in the state, with the Whitaker brand recognized for quality throughout the West. Thomas Jr., now a young man of 20, worked alongside his father, learning all aspects of the business he would someday inherit, while Catherine, at 18, had developed her mother's head for figures and helped manage the ranch's finances. Two more children had joined the family over the years. Robert, born in 1885, who showed a remarkable talent for working with horses, and Emily, their youngest, born in 1888, who had her father's quiet determination and her mother's love of the land. Warren and Winnie's partnership remained the foundation upon which everything else was built. Though silver had appeared in their hair, and the years of hard work had left their marks on their bodies, their love had only deepened with time and shared experiences. On their 25th wedding anniversary, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and friends from throughout the region, they renewed the vows they had made that autumn day so long ago. As Warren once again promised to love and cherish Winifred Thompson Whitaker all the days of his life, those who knew their story well recognized the truth in his words that a desperate dive into a flooded creek had been just the beginning of a lifelong rescue, each saving the other in countless ways through the years. In the decades to come, the story of the bride in the creek and the cowboy who saved her became part of local legend, told and retold around campfires and dinner tables. But for Warren and Winnie, it was simply the first chapter in their own personal love story, one that continued to unfold with each sunrise over the Montana land they both loved, in the home they had built together, in the family that carried their legacy forward. And Redemption Creek continued to flow, a constant reminder that sometimes the most frightening moments can lead to the greatest joys, and that courage, the courage to dive in when others stand back, the courage to love completely makes all the difference in the story of a life well lived.